Okay, we'll go ahead and get started. So just to housekeeping to give you the agenda for the rest of the day, we're going to hear next from Edward Upthegrove from the Florida Office of Attorney General, and Art Hushen is the lead instructor with the Attorney General's Office on CPTED. That'll take us for the next hour from now until 4:30. At 4:30, we're going to wrap up the presentations for the day with Bob Kolowski, who's a Deputy Assistant Secretary for the Department of Homeland Security. The remaining presentations that are on the agenda today we will not hear from, as we won't have time. I'll figure out how to fit those in tomorrow and make schedule adjustments tonight for tomorrow. Then the last thing today, after we hear from DHS, will be public comment. We do have about 5 public comment cards. So I would anticipate we'll wrap today at about 5:30 is the way it's looking. So we'll go ahead and begin with the presentation from Mr. Upthegrove and Mr. Hushen from the Attorney General's Office. Welcome.
Mr. Chair, Commissioners, my name is Edward Upthegrove. I'm with the Florida Attorney General's Office. I am the Program Administrator for the Florida Crime Prevention Institute, which is housed in the Bureau of Criminal Justice Programs, and we provide training around the state on various topics. One of them happened to be on crime prevention through environmental design. It was asked for our office if we could come present in front of the Commission today a basic understanding of what CPTED is and best practices as it relates to school safety. I have with us today our lead instructor on CPTED. He is the chair of the Florida Design Out Crime Association, Mr. Art Hushen.
Chair and Commission, thank you for allowing me to be here today. My name is Art Hushen. I'm the president and owner of the National Institute of Crime Prevention. I'm also the lead instructor for the Florida Crime Prevention Training Institute. I've been doing that since about 2001, 2002. I've been asked to talk to you today about CPTED, Crime Prevention Through Environmental Design. We've heard a lot of discussion about it, and you're probably going to hear more about it for the next couple of days. But the question is, what is it? You know, we hear about it, people talk about knowing it, but how do we apply it, and what's the benefit of looking at that program? When you think about CPTED, you have to look at Florida, the state, because we talk about where it came from, and it came from the state of Florida. 1971, there was a criminologist by the name of C. Ray Jeffries, Florida State University, and he came up with this phrase or this concept called crime prevention through environmental design. And he felt the way to combat crime was to design the total environment. And so now what we're going to do is break down what the total environment is. And I think you're going to be pleasantly surprised when we talk about the direction we're going to go with that. But when we talk about CPTED, we get back to the concept or the basics. What I want to cover today is what is crime prevention through environmental design, how we can use that for our school safety and security program, and the next thing is how to implement CPTED into the school safety and security program. So when we talk about the concepts and the initiatives, we have to go to the fundamentals first. And that is going to be the basic of natural surveillance, natural access control, territorial reinforcement, and maintenance. Now, you've heard mention of territoriality. You've heard a few comments about the overall or the perspective of CPTED, how we apply it. But we're going to go back down to the grassroots of CPTED and talk about how it impacts us today, cities that are utilizing this, along with school districts that are already adopting these concepts. So here's a chance for us to maybe look at standardizing this for the state and having design standards right across the board. That's going to help us create that safe and that comfortable learning environment. So the first thing, what is the premise of CPTED? Well, that is the proper design and effective use of the built environment that can lead to a reduction in fear of incidents and crime and an improvement of quality of life. That's what everyone's going to be talking about, the premise of CPTED. But what is the proper design? Who sets that standard of proper design? Is it going to be standardized throughout the state, or is it going to be left for district to district? And so when I look at proper design, that ties into every component of school design that you can possibly think of, from door design to building setback, to the design of our restrooms, to the design of the classrooms, to the design of the lobby, to the design of the reception area. These are all elements of CPTED when we look at the design of the school. And the effective use is how we use that space. And when we use it, we talk about how people interact in the built environment. How do they come into the building? Do they feel comfortable? Do they feel safe? Do they want to be there? So when we design it well, we can have that positive impact on people using that space. It also creates a sense of safety and security. If I like where I'm at, if I enjoy being there, if I understand how the building works, I'm going to feel very comfortable. I'm going to consider going there again and again and again. I'm going to continue to use that space. But when I look at CPTED, though, we start breaking down the concept of what is CPTED design. Well, when I look at design defined under the CPTED model, it includes the physical design, which you're going to hear a lot about this next few days. What we tend to forget is the other component, social management. And that's key for me. I can design it with some good strategies, but do people feel comfortable using that space? What programs do we have in place to give them the resources they need if something does happen or if they see something going on? So we're going to build it well, provide the resources, and then we look at directives that seek to affect positively human behavior as people interact within their environment. In this case, it's going to be a school. And those directives are rules. And those rules, we want them visibly, we want them present, we want them up front, we want them throughout the entire quarter. This is the expectation. Because when people get away from that, when they don't follow the norm, we can now identify that, and we have the resources to go to look for the assistance that we do need for that site or for what's taking place. Now, the environment defined includes people and their physical and social surroundings. And the social, that's the component that's missing. So we're going to design it, and we're going to look at the surroundings that encourage positive behavior. We're going to provide the resources to enforce that type of behavior throughout the school. And these are things that are being done throughout the country. It's not just here in Florida that we're talking about this. I do training in several other states, and I get a chance to see what other school districts are doing and other cities are doing to promote these concepts. So we're going to apply them here. We're going to try to get them going in a way where we can maybe standardize these concepts as part of our design guidelines. The real power of your CPTED program that we sometimes forget about is that everyone benefits from these standards. Everyone, from the students to the staff to the teachers to the neighbors next door to people that want to visit the school. This has a positive influence on what's going on. CPTED is about people and quality of life. We get too focused on the design sometimes and we forget about the social programs. So we really need to build on that as we start looking at standardizing these concepts and maybe making them something permanent, something sustainable, something that we can refer to back and we have a model that we can follow throughout the state. The goal of CPTED is to reduce the opportunities for crime that may be inherent in the design of the school. Can this be new design? Yes. Can we take a look at an old design and make the changes? Yes. A lot of the schools we have in the state are old. I can give you all the good things about a new design because we can build it now, but what about schools that are already there? What about schools that have been there 30 years? Can we apply these strategies there? Yes, we can. And we'll talk about the process of doing that as well. CPTED uses various tools. We talk about evaluating the environmental conditions and utilize intervention methods. And those intervention methods we want to provide as part of the training that's conducted by the Florida Crime Prevention Training Institute. We want to have a standard of training so everyone recognizes these strategies and are able to identify them and make those corrections. We focus on methods to control human criminal behavior and reduce the fear of crime. Going back to C. Ray Jeffries, Florida State University in 1971, the total environment. How do we build it? How do we sustain that? How can we make sure this is long-term? And these are things we're going to cover in this session. We understand now that the arrangement and design of buildings and open space can either encourage or discourage undesirable behavior in criminal activity or criminal events. So we're going to start designing it and look at how students move into the building, how staff moves into the building, how we connect to the parking lots, how we connect from one building to the next, to the exterior, how we connect to the bus stop that's right outside the school. All of this is part of your CPTED program, providing that line of sight, providing that level of comfort where students feel safe and that they're to learn. And that's a priority for us under the CPTED program. We talk about school districts, what they're doing today. And school districts throughout the country are adopting these CPTED standards. And these standards are universal when you think about the concepts. They overlap as we start applying it from state to state. We talk about requiring site plan reviews as we go for new construction or major renovation. Are these concepts being applied? If not, why not? Is it part of the design guidelines? Is it part of the design requirements for the site? And we're going to focus on crime prevention and safety in mind. For me, when we get into breaking down the school components, it's the learning environment, and then we supplement that with security if we need to. But good design first, and good design can serve as a mitigating strategy when I think about criminal behavior on that site. And even on a retrofit, we can still apply those good design strategies. When I look at some of the schools and what they're doing, you can take a look at the slide. You see CPTED for schools, CPTED best practices, CPTED design strategies and concepts. Architectural firms throughout the U.S. now are adopting a lot of these concepts. A lot of them can't even bid on a school project unless a member of that team is certified in CPTED. So not only are we looking for the standards within ourselves or within our district, we're looking at the professionals that are designing those schools to have to meet those same requirements as well. And for me, if we're all on the same page, it makes it a lot easier for us to adopt these concepts. When we look at new strategies that are out, we can look at the CDC, the Center for Disease Control in Atlanta. They presented this template last year to talk about the concepts, and it's crime prevention through environmental design for schools. Now, that is a true CPTED approach, using only CPTED strategies to create a safe learning environment. And to adopt that, can you imagine now if we include a physical security component onto that? Can you imagine the impact we'd have on that school? Blending good design with physical security, blending that along with social programs, empowering students to take ownership of the space and providing the resources for them in case they need that. I think it's a win-win for all of us if we can set that standard or standardize these concepts. You're going to hear mention of the Florida Safe School Design Guidelines. Now, the first issue I saw was about in 2003, I believe, and it needs to be updated. It's a great manual. I mean, I share this information throughout the U.S. All we're doing right now is trying to update that information just a bit, and it's a tool we can use today. We have one of the architects from Florida Design on Crime that's working on updating that manual as we speak. So we want to keep it current, again, good design strategies for each one. Now, CPTED is a multidisciplinary approach. It just can't fall on one person's shoulders. You know, everyone has to take responsibility for these concepts. So now we start looking at planning. We look at architecture. We look at landscape architecture. We look at law enforcement, engineers, and securities, the role we all play to address these concepts and apply them throughout the district. And these are things that we can really have an input in as far as designing a safe environment. CPTED is based on these overlapping concepts: natural surveillance, natural access control, territorial reinforcement, and maintenance. Now, the first one, natural surveillance. Can I see? Can I see what's taking place? People feel comfortable in an environment when they know they're under eyes of other people utilizing that space. Offenders don't want to be observed, and that's what's seen nationally. In most cases, offenders do not want to be observed, especially when they're approaching my building. So we use good design concepts to recognize that movement further away. We begin layering those concepts in as people approach the building, as they transition into the lobby area, then transition through the school corridors. So good line of sight is one of the strategies we look at. Natural access control, how do I manage movement into my building? Do I have a focal point or celebrated entryway? Do I highlight that? So I want to eliminate all the excuses why people do not comply with the rules. I was lost. I didn't know where I was going. I thought I could come in through this doorway. Now that person's a threat based off the design of the school. They shouldn't be there in the first place. But good design gets you to where you need to go. And that's going to be key for us when we start talking about activity taking place around the school. We talk about territorial reinforcement, showing ownership. What type of fencing do we use to set up that perimeter? What about our line of sight? Am I going with 6-foot or 4-foot fences? Am I going with anti-climb fence for that facility? Can I soften up the look of the fencing with landscaping? So these are strategies we look at as well. And the last one is going to be maintenance. We have these great ideas, but can we maintain them? Are they sustainable? Are we sure that our camera system will work? Our landscaping, our lighting? These are all things we address under the CPTED program. Natural surveillance. When we talk about the application, increase the threat of apprehension by taking steps to increase the perception that people can be seen. An example is nothing more than kids looking out a window. Can I see who's approaching the school? Can I see who's entering the building? Can I see who's in the parking lot? These are all key for me, especially when we work on the programs so students know what to identify. They know what to look for, and they recognize that's a threat. I need to let someone know before it even gets close to my building. Improving visibility with lighting or transparent building materials. That's going to be window placement. When we start looking at standards, 20% transparency, 30% transparency, how much do I want, and can I set that as a standard to apply that natural surveillance? I look at avoiding the creation of building entrapment areas. For our older schools, that's a challenge. And that comes back to the design team, the CPTED team. How do I eliminate those areas of entrapment? And then design landscaping that allows clear, unobstructed view of the surrounding areas. How do we do that? Well, for me, I look at the 2-foot, 6-foot rule. And that's all landscaping not to exceed 2 feet in height, low ground cover, lower tree canopy, 6 foot and higher. I maintain that surveillance along the entire campus. I can see what's going on. I'm species specific on the plant species I allow to be placed there. And how do I do that? Well, through standardization. I include that as part of our CPTED requirements for the site. So when I look at that, the view looking out with windows and landscaping, I can still aesthetically design a school that looks great as I layer my security into the building design. Some examples, and these are schools outside of the state of Florida that I wanted to highlight for you. Here's an elementary school that got a little carried away with the landscaping. And this is a corridor between the two buildings that they use for a learning area. Now imagine your first responders having to get in there, or for students that need to evacuate the building quickly, yet this district allowed that to take place. Under the CPTED program, that wouldn't happen. That would fall under our maintenance program, which is the 2-foot, 6-foot rule. Another look again, there's my escape window for my students to get out of the building in older construction. How do I fix that? I have a standard. I go back to the 2-foot, 6-foot rule. And then the entryway coming into my school on the left-hand side. We might look at it as, oh, that looks nice. I have the landscaping there. My staff's not going to like it because we can't see what's going on. What about my first responders? They have no clue what's going on the other side of that. How do we fix that? Well, standardization again. 2-foot, 6-foot rule along that entire corridor so we can see what's taking place. Another example from another school, because we're talking about an older school, they didn't have the chance to design the security checkpoint. They said, we know we got to have security up front. We know we have to have people check in, so let's do it this way. And when I had a chance to walk this school, that was one of my first recommendations. You got to fix this. Because if we look at the checkpoint, notice I've got 3 security officers there. Well, that's a positive having 3 there. But what are they looking at? Where's the entryway and where is the visitor parking? Right behind them. So they have no line of sight looking out into the parking lot. They have no idea someone's approaching the school with a weapon. So that becomes a concern. And then you take a look at the upper right-hand corner, you see the doorway that allows access into the building. Their response time is not going to be there. It's going to be too late for them based off the design on this older building. Where it should be located is up against the wall, facing outward. If I have a limited budget, I can apply that strategy there. Now, why wasn't it placed in the wall in the first place? Well, if you notice at the bottom left-hand side by the security desk, you're going to see an outlet and a plug. And that's where they wanted them to hook into the power and to access the internet. And when I asked why wasn't it set on the far wall, well, because it would have cost us $300 to run the wiring over there. And I'm like, okay, well, let's find that $300 and run the wiring over there and set it up where it needs to be. In many cases, they would have just let that go. So now we start looking again at how do we standardize this? How do we make that difference? So I look at natural access control as one of my strategies. How we design the street, the sidewalk, the building entryway. How can I use this to guide people into where I want them to go? Does it mean I have to use some type of bollard or barrier that doesn't look inviting to the school? No, I can add color to that. I can encourage people to use that entryway. There's all kinds of strategies I can apply under my CPTED program. Make sure my entrances are visible, well lit, and overlooked by windows, bringing more surveillance outward. Clearly defining the entryway. Remember, we're trying to eliminate all the excuses why people don't comply with the rules. So we want to limit access to other points of the site and guide everyone to that main entryway. Highlight the main entryway. You'll see a few examples here in just a moment. Clearly mark your walkways and paths. Guide people to where they need to go to as they transition from the public space into my school. And then a comprehensive wayfinding system. I want to clear that people know where to check in, where they need to go, where they're not allowed to go. For emergency egress in the event of something taking place, I want wayfinding to get you out quickly. I want all my signage to be a pedestrian scale, clearly defined, so there's no doubt where we need to go if something does take place. When I look at natural access control, I can use color, in this case, bright lemon yellow to guide you in. And it gets you right to my main entryway. And then I provide seating, so people can sit here, either grabbing a sandwich or taking a break, and they're observing who's approaching the building and coming in. So I'm extending my surveillance away from the building, further out, to try to identify the offender as they approach. Natural access control, I was just introduced to this design 3 weeks ago from a firm out of Philadelphia. And I saw it and I was just, what they did with the color red to highlight the entryway, that is part of our wayfinding strategy. So I asked if I could use the photo for this, and they said yes. But I take a look at the window placement above, and then I start looking at interior design classrooms so we can see out and see who's approaching. But it's pretty clear to me when I approach the school where the entryway is, eliminating all the excuses why people don't comply with the rules. And that is nothing but good design, and something we need to look at standardizing as I look at school construction. Even on a renovation, even on an older school, I can highlight that entryway. In this case, they've got the signage. Notice the pavers. Notice how they highlighted the walkway. They've added landscaping to highlight the entryway. They've created a gap so there's no air of concealment. They've got the signage up on the front. They've got the directives at the doorway. Here's where you check in. Here's the expectation. You come into the building, and if you're in the wrong building, here's a map right next to you to help you to get to where you need to go. All that is part of your CPTED design review. Territorial reinforcement, one of our strategies, attributes that express ownership. This is our school, this is our space. I can use that through fencing. I can have decorative fencing that supports target hardening, and I can add elements of design to that to show this is our school. Pavement treatment, signage, and landscaping are all strategies I can apply for that site. When I look at territorial reinforcement, you take a look at some of the fencing that's available to you. I want to get the signage up. I want to get the directives up. Please visit the office upon your arrival. Please check in and guide them to where they need to go. I can use different types of barriers you see in the lower left-hand side. I can use cable to create a barrier. I let my landscaping grow over that, and no one realizes target hardened. I've softened it up with landscaping. And then my bollards on the lower right-hand side keep a vehicle from driving into the campus. And then I can add decorative bollards to ensure that and still give the feeling that this is a place of learning. We haven't target hardened, it is a place of learning. Maintenance plays an important part of that. Sustainability, and that's what I emphasize time and time again. We want our program to be sustainable, long-term. So when I look at maintenance, that ties into my expression of ownership. We own this space. We're repairing things that are wrong. For example, fencing that's been damaged that we don't repair. Lights that are inoperative using old technology, which we'll cover today. Cameras, the camera in the center, the wiring's been pulled out, it's not functioning anymore. So it gives you that false sense of security as you look at that. Then you look at landscaping on, in this case, my tennis courts. Why aren't those maintained? And when the principal asked me, why is this type of behavior going on in the tennis courts? I'm like, well, let me help you with that. You can't see what's going on in the tennis court, so let's trim that down a bit so we can see what's taking place. And then you look at graffiti and etching on glass. That should have been replaced a long time ago. So maintenance has to be one of our strategies. We'll look at the site. Then we can take a look at target hardening as one of our strategies. Now, it's not the primary goal of CPTED, but it's something we have to identify and address as we look at building design. And it's one of the most obvious ways to prevent crime. And this ties into your alarm systems, your locks, your devices, ballistic material on the windows. These are all things we'll address as we go site by site. Makes the target difficult for the offender to get into. Then we look at locks, reinforced walls, fortified doors, bars, and laminated glass. In the planning world, we call this the urban fortress model. You know, sometimes we make no issue or attempt to deal with what's happening outside the building. And that's where your social programs come in, the resources to deal with that. So we can design it using a lot of these elements, but we include that social component under our CPTED initiative. So when I talk about my school design, we talked about some of our technology. Now, whether I'm looking at cameras or secondary locks on the doors, these are all things we have to get approval from fire as we begin to look at the site, so they need to be a member of the program as well. I look at camera placement and design. You know, that's going to be key to me as well. I look at maybe using technology. I see the Nashville School District using facial recognition in the quarters. So I have to look at the database and how we pull from that. I look at ballistic glass. I look at communication devices, whether we go with a fob or radio. These are all things we address as part of our strategies. Under the design component, when I talk about school design, I have to look at how design impacts the safety, whether old or new construction. I look at stairs and ramp design. Now, these are just a few I picked for you to look at. You know, the training we're looking at is actually 64 hours, and we cover a lot of that in that session with the AG's office. But stairs and ramp design, parking lot design, and lighting. Then I start looking at interior and exterior lighting. And I know you're going to hear it, too, as part of your security components. But stairs and ramp design is a quick one we can look at. A lot of our schools are 2 or 3 stories. A lot of our parking garages might be 2 or 3 stories. So in the old stair design, don't have the ability to see who's coming down the stairs. And for me, I feel uncomfortable using that. Even I remember being a student in school going up the stairs, I couldn't see around it. Now, we fix that by adding mirrors. Something as simple as that. Adding mirrors when we look at old construction. The ability for you to see above you. And now my first responders have quick access to that upper level, because now they can see as they approach. Even on my design standards, looking at the stairwell on the left, on the right. The one on the left, that's a visual barrier. I can't see through it. So what if I change my construction standards and now allow you to look through that stairwell? That speeds up my first responders coming into the school. Teachers and staff like it, so they can see what kids are doing. Hey, you shouldn't be there, go to class. Hey, break time is over, let's go to class. So it provides that visual connection as I look down those corridors. Lighting is going to be key for me. Sometimes we see our schools becoming the centers of community. We hold all kinds of events there. We reach out to the community, whether PTA meetings, whether after-school classes, whether teaming up with the VOTEC school to offer adult education. We're using those parking lots at nighttime, and in many cases, we're using old technology for lighting. So we start throwing money away for that. So now we look at upgrades under the CPTED program as we measure the light that you have and examine that. We're going to switch over, in this case, to LED. We look at uniformity. LED lighting helps with my security, especially for my camera system. And then we eliminate dark spots at nighttime where offenders can hide and wait to commit a crime. So good lighting is one of the strategies we look at as well. We follow foot candle standards. We follow uniformity levels for our recommendation for the school, and that's something we teach in the course with the AG's office. We look at hallway design, including lighting, interior and exterior lighting. Interior lighting, I want to be comfortable and inviting. I want to eliminate any type of glare. We start looking at locker placement, recessed, if I can do that, or do I extend it out? Well, then I know I need to fix that. We look at where we place our vending machines along the corridors. I don't want to create areas of concealment. I don't want to slow down my first responders. And then the exterior lighting to guide you into the facility. Those are all key to me as I look at each site. Elevators, doors and windows, blind spots or ambush points. New schools, I can get that done once we start setting some of those design standards. But when I start looking at interior design, if I'm looking for an elevator for ADA access to the upper level, I'm going to go with panoramic view elevators every time. Even on a retrofit, I'm going to recommend that because I want you to be able to see as you're using that elevator. I want my first responders to see who's in that elevator. And if I can't do that, if I'm stuck with old technology, I add mirrors. Mirrors so when the door opens, they can see inside before the door is fully open. So students can see if anyone's inside as they get ready to use the elevator. And then add mirrors to the exterior so when the door opens, you can see down the corridor. All this to help you to feel comfortable as you use the space and make it difficult for the offender to stage and commit that crime. Interior classroom, I start looking at door and window design, which are key for me. Window design, then I look at classroom design. I look at workstation orientation. How do I provide additional surveillance outward? Height of the windows, location of the windows, strategic placement of those windows throughout the building, and then the door design. That's key for me as well. Can we look out the door and then recess back to secure in place? Do I have a good line of sight that we can peek through and see what's going on? How does the door open? What kind of locking device do I use? These are all critical when I think about moving and just the comfort of going in and out of that classroom. Design, when I talk about blind spots or ambush points, these are what I'm talking about. These are inherent in some of the older designs. How do I fix that? What strategy do I attach to that? Because if I don't fix it, that's where the offender might stage to commit the crime. So I have to look at fencing. I have to look at landscaping. And when I look between the gym and the building on the right, that's easy access for any offender. You say, well, let's add a camera to fix that. Well, no, I don't want to add a camera. I want to put a real barrier there and make it difficult for the offender to get in there because I don't have real-time viewing. So these are things we consider as we go site by site. Design, my school restrooms, I heard mention of that early on, which we now refer to as comfort stations, trying to get a way of calling these restrooms. Building circulation patterns, how you come in and transition through the building. And then I look at common areas that we share. Design, when I talk about school restrooms or comfort station, how do I design them? I want them to be inviting and open. Issues I can deal with here with good design are bullying. I eliminate those opportunities for bullying to take place there based off of good design. And even on a retrofit, I can change that, we'll see in just a moment. But I look at wet and dry areas, I transition out, providing more ice to the side. I go with maze entryways to make it difficult for an offender to lock themselves inside, and we hear noise coming out if someone needs assistance. I can add windows to what I currently have. And the first thing people tell me, you cannot add windows to a restroom. And school districts are already doing that. So now I can see inside. I still have my privacy, but I still have the area up in front where staff can walk by and observe what's taking place. And that, in turn, decreases bullying. I do follow-ups with a lot of the schools I work with, opportunities to address that for each site. And then students feel comfortable using that, bringing more eyes to that spot where they might not normally go to. How do I bring students in and out of my building? How do I bring guests in and out of my building? Do I add windows to that corridor? If I add windows, what's taking place behind them? In this case, I want to add a seating area. A seating area provides seating. You can plug in your laptop, you can sit here, you can grab a soft drink, but I'm getting you to look towards the entryway. I'm getting you to look towards the parking lot. I'm getting you to look towards the main office. All these is we look at workstation orientation. Being able to identify the threat from far away and take steps to make sure that doesn't happen or to make it difficult for that offender. I look at my common areas. How do I design my libraries? How do I design my cafeteria? We even go as far as what type of tables do we use in case students need to get out quickly. I don't want anyone stumbling or tripping over a table. So how can I design that to ensure I've got quick egress away? How do I position that? Where do I place my ingress and egress? And if you look at the upper right-hand side, notice the barrier from the second floor. It's open. So my first responders coming in can clearly see if anyone's up there and eliminate any hiding areas. So all these come back to good design standards, and these are things we really want to enforce. So when I look at my strategies, here's another school that's from another state. New construction, just to let you know, it's not perfect. We look at new design unless we have standards. I come into the main entryway to the building, and if I look on the left-hand side by the American flag, that's my main office. So you are supposed to walk in and check into that office. What happens if you choose not to walk in and check into the office? You have access to the entire school. So yeah, so who slows you down if you choose not to check in? So what about security devices to fix that before we even open the school? Why did we put the reception office there instead of not in the front? Why don't we have a double door entryway to funnel people in and have our staff check them in before they come into the building? So even new construction isn't perfect. We have to start setting those standards during the design phase to make sure they're done. So a couple of ways to implement this. I've thought about it for a bit, kind of talked to other people about how we can get this done. So the first thing, CPTED principles will be incorporated in all school security safety assessments, and they'll be listed right there in that assessment form. These assessments should be conducted every 2 years. So we want to set the standards, we want to show the standards, and through the training with the AG's office that's provided, we learn about those standards, we learn how to apply them when we're in the field. The CPTED assessment will be conducted by persons who have received and maintained the Florida CPTED Practitioner Designation, or FCP, through the Florida Attorney General's office or a similar CPTED designation program. We have architects bidding on school projects here in Florida from out of state. So now we look at other components that might be available to them as they come in to bid on Florida school projects. So that's the second one we can consider. Third one, all CPTED recommendations will be implemented within a set period of time and maintained. I want this program to be sustainable and long-term. I don't want to reinvent the wheel every time we look at a school or work with a district. These are things that we can have in place as we look at new construction or major renovation. CPTED design guideline standards for schools will be established at a state level. And I see that in other states or other groups starting to do that. I work with a lot of cities that implement these standards based off planning and zoning and code. But a chance to us to set those guidelines early on. For new construction, major renovation, now we do have the ability to work on old schools as we start to make those changes as well. All new construction or major renovation, a member of the bidding design team, the group bidding on that school, must have earned the Florida CPTED Practitioner Designation or a similar CPTED designation to bid on school projects. We set that as a standard now. If you're going to bid on one of our schools, then you better understand the concepts of CPTED and show that you learn them and understand them by having earned one of the designations that's out there. We're all doing it on this side. Why aren't the developers doing it as well, the architects? So we start setting the standards for both if you want to bid on a project here or a school in the state of Florida. All proposed changes will be reviewed and approved by the CPTED design team, and that can be your school security team as well. But we want that security team to have earned and maintained that designation again for CPTED. We want to be on the same page as we make these recommendations or a similar designation program. And once we do this, we can have a program that's sustainable and long-term, because I don't want to reinvent the wheel every time. If we can set that now as a standard, I think we can be pretty successful. You know, the emphasis is still the learning environment. That's key for us. We talk about natural light and window placement, but I have to look at physical security as one of those strategies as well. But if we can put it together in a format that's easy to understand, that's adopted by the designers and the districts, I think we have a sustainable long-term program that we can keep going for many, many years. So I want to thank you for allowing me to talk to you about the CPTED program, and I'm open for any questions you might have. So thank you very much for allowing me this opportunity. Thank you.
Shacker?
Thank you very much, Mr. Hushen. I appreciate your presentation. I enjoyed it. Number one, can you come and do an assessment at Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School?
I would love to do it. I'd love to be part of that.
Thank you. Number two, what does CPTED say about fire alarms? That was a major point of catastrophe in our school.
Mm-hmm. And that comes down to the directives. We really list that right up in front. You know, that's an initiative that the board creates, or the school board, or the district. But if it does a standard that's met, it has to be in the directives. It has to be in the directives.
So do you state that children should not immediately evacuate during a fire alarm? Is that part of CPTED?
That's part of the directives again that you establish.
You don't get involved in that, or that's just fire code?
Once again, if that's the directive that's established by the school, we will reinforce that through good design to get students out.
Now, I mean, I totally agree with your objective to try to get this, instituted as a standard across. Do you integrate with PASS?
I've never integrated with. I've heard good things about them.
Okay.
They take a lot of the concepts and apply them, which I love hearing about. And it's something we see also in the Florida Safe School Design Guidelines. I see it in California as well. Everyone seems to be coming together to start applying this.
Yeah, it would be good if there was,
collaboration,
unification. So we have, one school safety standards. Visitor vestibules. Is CPTED in favor of that, or?
I want to limit access into the building, so if I create a visitor vestibule, that's something we'll look at. We'll look at the material used to design that. We'll look at the placement, the orientation for that as well.
Okay. And then as far as Indiana's Public Law 27, they have four main things. Number one, there has to be immediate notification to 911, immediate notification that there's a life-threatening emergency. Number two, that each classroom should be a protected space. And then the other is that there has to be, law enforcement has to have the ability to remotely launch countermeasures to attack the attacker within a minute. How does CPTED,
Oh, I agree with all those.
Do you agree with all those? Okay.
Oh, yeah, we have the directives in place and have support from the district. I agree 100%.
Okay,
Those
wonderful,
are standards
wonderful.
we should meet.
And then, let's see here. And as far, is CPTED included in the FSSAT?
That, I wouldn't know off the top of my head.
You're going to have a presentation, probably we're rearranging the schedule tomorrow morning on the FSSAT, so.
If it's not, I certainly would recommend it. What do you think, Chairman?
Let's hear the presentation tomorrow. I know that there are, I can tell you this, I know that there are some concepts. They may not be labeled as CPTED, but in the current instrument, there are some of those concepts that are in there as evaluation points.
Thank you.
Other questions? So, you mentioned a lot about new construction and major remodels. You touched on at the end of the presentation about the ability to do some of this in older construction existing facilities. Do you have any examples of how that is? Because the reality is that most of the schools are older, they've been around for a long time, and there are no plans to replace them or do major remodels. Of course, what goes with a major remodel is a significant cost.
Yes.
So do you have any examples in places where districts have looked across the board, or especially across the state, and looked at these older schools and effectively, without a significant cost, of implemented these concepts in older schools?
Right. What I've seen in some examples is, for example, doorway design. That's something we can do pretty quickly on an older facility. If I have a door with no windows, I can add that. If I have a classroom with no windows looking in the hallway, I can add that through a door window. So little change we can make. The design coming into the lobby, I can look at the mechanism locking the door. I can look at rerouting people into the office by saving money on that end, and how we design the entryway where they have to check in at a certain point and then allowed access into the building.
So interestingly, following up on the last presentation, some of the comments, it seems like there was some discussion about not having windows, but you're advocating for windows.
In most cases, I am a fan of natural light coming in because that helps with the learning process. And if I can allow staff to be able to hear a noise and look outside, whether it's a quick peek and then behind a barrier, I'm all for allowing for that surveillance. That's pretty standard when we look at some of our safe school design strategies, that we want to provide some surveillance outward in the event something takes place.
Are there any, can you name a specific district that has implemented this again, any place in the country, a specific district that has looked at older schools, and you said there are some things you can do, like, signs, et cetera, but that have taken a lot of these and with older construction and done a district-wide change and implemented this? Are there any that have done that you're aware of?
I'm aware from some of the architects that are required to do it. I've worked with them where they've had to make those changes, but I don't know the specific name of the district other than I've worked with their architects.
It goes without saying, but I mean, just sitting here thinking about it, is there, whenever you look at any of this, and some of the things are minor, but the cost factor, and it's a reality.
Right.
The state has this year in non-recurring money allocated $100 million. It's all got to be dispersed by January 15th. But the districts themselves, no question, have financial challenges. So that all of this has to be considered against that backdrop, of course, which some of it's easier, but some of it may be more challenging to implement.
That's true. And when we talk about CPTED, we talk about CPTED as the most cost-effective way of combating crime, because we're looking at minimal design changes for some side, change in behavior modifications, social programs. Now, once I get into target hardening, it's expensive. Then I see that taking place. But yeah, if I can start making minute changes early on that has the overall impact on safety, that's where CPTED plays that perfect role.
Senator Book?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you so much for your presentation. Can you just talk a little bit about the school restrooms and comfort stations in the windows? Could you just talk through that with me?
Oh,
real
yes.
quick?
What you have is under the old design is that you have solid walls and solid doors. And a lot of these are placed in areas we don't have a lot of movement coming through. And so students are reluctant to use that amenity. So they're afraid to go and use the toilet, so which in turn leads to health issues later on. They're afraid of bullying. They're afraid of gang activity. So what we do in some cases is just create a portal into that restroom based off the design. Once again, you've got the sinks in the front and a partial wall where you have privacy. And allow staff and other students to walk by and glance inside to see what's happening. In some cases, we prop the door open for sound to come in, but now we have that visual connection between the two.
Mr. Chair, is it okay? Is that also, I've seen some schools where there's no door for the bathroom. That's kind of like, is that good, bad?
That's similar. That's a maze entryway.
Okay.
And so because it allows sound to carry out, if a student's in distress or needs assistance, others can hear that now instead of a solid core door in that case. When we start taking a look at restroom design, we see gang activity, drug activity sometimes, bullying, because it's an isolated area. You don't have a lot of surveillance going in. When you open it up, that's more difficult. One of the school districts I worked with in South Texas, when they added the windows, they found that bullying dropped substantially during their interviews with students. Do you feel comfortable using that? And when we can start bringing in students to come up with some design recommendations as well, because they're in that environment every day, it only makes our program more successful.
Anybody else? Any other questions?
I had one follow-up question.
Sure, go ahead.
How do you balance your, wanting to have light come in and more windows where, I see windows as an opportunity, and as an opportunity to take children's lives, as what happened here.
We can look at tubular lighting.
If it's not ballistic hardened.
No, we can look at tubular lighting coming from the roof down. We can look at how we have windows on the upper level. If we have windows on the first floor, they can go a little bit higher, above pedestrian scale. So we're letting the natural light in, but you can't see in. But the perception, you can see from inside out because of the window.
All right, thank you very much. Appreciate the presentation.
Thank you.
All right, the next presentation that we'll wrap up with here this afternoon is active assailant prevention and response and best practices from the Department of Homeland Security. And we have with us Bob Kolowski, who's a Deputy Assistant Secretary in DHS's Office of Infrastructure Protection. Welcome and thank you for being here.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks for having me. I'm light on slides today. I apologize. We're in the process of updating our guidance. I'll talk a little bit about it. We're about 3 weeks away from having the guidance published, and we'll make sure that the commission has it to benefit you on your work. Let me start by just saying that as an outsider